Want to especially thank Mark Rylance and Andy Brennan for preparing that video. It took hours. Thank you, Mark and Andy. This is the last in our sermon series on the church's new vision statement, and we're going to do it all together. You ready? We are a community of servants called by God's reconciling grace to open doors of sanctuary, to create new avenues of ministry, to equip Christians for discipleship, and to lead reconciling ministries. You're so much better than they were at 9. You just knocked it out of the park. Way to go. Okay. To lead reconciling ministries. Reconciliation is very important in this statement. We say it twice. Saved by God's reconciling grace to lead reconciling ministries. What is reconciliation? For me, the best definition is still what John Steinbeck says in The Grapes of Wrath. He says, reconciliation is the movement in our thought from thinking you and me to we, a notion that we are all in it together, that the line that separates us has been erased. So our reconciling ministry is to see it as we, where we're all in it together. Now there are lots of lines that separate people. There are racial lines, there are national lines, there are religious lines, there are gender lines, there are orientation lines, there are economic lines, there's immigrant and citizen. There are many lines that separate people. One of the things that I don't like about myself when I talk about reconciliation and erasing that line is that in the very act of trying to erase the line and move to a we thinking, I create the line. Here's an example. We should reach out to Muslims. We should reach out to Muslims. The very act of saying that says that Muslims are on the outside and that there's a line between us. And that I'm kind of the normal, and they aren't. The very act of trying to erase the line actually creates the line where there's exclusion and a sense of otherness. Several years ago, Bishop Palmer preached here. And he preached on the theme of unity and diversity and unity. And several of you, and including me, were bothered by his preaching a sermon on unity and never using the words gay or lesbian. A couple weeks after he preached that sermon, he and I were together alone, and we were talking about his King Avenue experience, and I said, Bishop Palmer, people were upset, and I was too, that you couldn't say the word gay or lesbian. And it gave us the impression that you were not accepting us. And he said to me, and he did this with his hand, and he pulled at his skin, and he said, you know, as a black man, I am often in the minority, and I'm often in the minority in the audience when somebody gives a speech or a sermon about reaching out to the outsider, to the other. And he said, and it usually says, we should reach out to black people. And he said, as soon as the speaker says that, I feel like I'm on the other side of the line. And I feel excluded. And he said, I wanted to be very careful at King Avenue, knowing that that's how I feel when people talk about including blacks, that I didn't want gays or lesbians to have that experience of inclusion. So he said, that's why I didn't say the words. Now, whether or not we agree with him, I think he is right. That when we try to erase the line, we create it. This is, I think, part of the human condition. It's how human beings see things. We see things dualistically. Or another buzzword today is in a binary fashion. It's an either-or. Either black or white. Either male or female. Either gay or straight. Either immigrant or citizen. Either Christian or Muslim. It's this either or, and it creates a situation of a win-lose proposition. You know, if you help rural people, you've hurt urban people. If you help Southerners, you've hurt Northern people. It's a win-lose, and it's a zero-sum game that we play. So it's almost impossible in human thinking to do away with that line between people. I get a kick out of in Congress how so often we hear, we need to cross the aisle, the Democrats need to cross the aisle, the Republicans need to cross the aisle. Where the very act of saying that we need to cross the aisle establishes the aisle and keeps us apart because we like that label. Yeah. Paul says that's human thinking. That's an old creation way of thinking, this dualism, this win-lose proposition of lines between us. He says we need to see things from Christ's new creation, from the divine point of view. How do we see reconciliation? And how is reconciliation possible from the divine point of view where it just isn't from the human point of view? Paul says, God made Christ to be sin who knew no sin. Often, I think reconciliation fails when I try to reconcile with you because I'm perfect and you're not. I'm up here and you're here. You're flawed, you're imperfect, you're a sinner, and I'm not. And it's just so hard to find a common ground, isn't it? You've got to come up here to my level of perfection, and you just can't do it because you're imperfect. What God says is, Christ became sin who knew no sin. Christ took on humanity, that the common ground for meeting people is not perfection, it's imperfection. And we really don't understand Christianity until we come to accept our imperfection, that Christ is on the sinful level, the flawed label that we're on. I think in our society, more and more and more, we argue from the level of our perfection and our neighbor's imperfection. You know, every morning we wake up to a tweet that is telling us that somebody is imperfect. I'm perfect and you're not. And every morning we turn on the news and hear that tweet, and then we hear commentators responding, and they're saying, I'm perfect and you're not. It's hard for a country that's so divided to come together when everyone's perfect. Wouldn't it be wonderful to get a tweet that says, I really didn't think that through. I made a mistake here. And wouldn't it be wonderful to hear Morning Joe say, we blew the coverage of that. We really made assumptions that were unfair. Wouldn't it be great to have people meet on the level of their imperfection? I am so good at finding imperfection in you and perfection in me. It's just hard to come together. It's self-righteousness, isn't it, when we think we're perfect. And Paul talks not about the self-righteousness of the Christian. He talks about that we are the righteousness of God. The righteousness of God is not about arrogance or being full of ourselves or being perfect. It's about humility and knowing that we're imperfect. God in Christ became sin. God humbled God's self. God became forgiving. God became loving, not judgmental. Another thing about seeing it from the divine point of view is in Galatians, Paul talks about in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. That those labels that we use in dualism of male and female, slave and free, Jew and Greek, Christian and Muslim, don't exist in Christ. What exists in Christ, according to Paul, is that Christ is in me and Christ is in you, and that's where we come together. My job is to see Christ in you, and your job is to see Christ in me. That's the ground we meet on, not those other marks that divide us. It says in our vision statement, we are saved by God's reconciling grace to lead in reconciling ministries. It's reconciling, not reconciled. Reconciled is it's an action that's over and complete. Reconciling is perpetual. It's constant. It's every day. Every day we wake up, my guess is there's some reconciling action we need to take with the people with whom we live, with the people with whom we work, with the people who live next door to us. And that is hard work. That puts us in an uncomfortable position to be reconciling. Thank God Christ is in us, helping us be reconciling. So we are a reconciling church to lead in reconciling ministries. Certainly our reconciling work is about reconciling and erasing the line around gender orientation. Certainly that's it, but it's more than that. There are lines everywhere that we need to be reconciling and erasing. That uncomfortable work of reconciliation. Now, when Steinbeck talks about reconciliation in Grapes of Wrath, he says it's the most revolutionary idea in human history, this erasing of the line between me and you. He says it creates a sense of belonging. We belong to each other. And that energy that we use to keep those lines existent when they're erased generate and release all this energy in unity to oppose things like poverty and homelessness and loneliness. And then he goes on to say what this revolutionary idea of reconciliation does in this sense of belonging is generate a sense of sharing. It's a sense of community where we share what we have with each other. And in Grapes of Wrath, there's powerful scenes of the Okies sharing what they have. It makes us more giving. It makes us more generous. Now, you'll be getting your pledge cards in the mail this week, and Pledge Sunday is next Sunday, and this is the closest you're ever going to get to a stewardship sermon this year. I haven't talked hardly anything about money in this sermon, but a church that leads in reconciling ministries and is called by God's reconciling grace really shouldn't need money preached about, because we understand as reconciling people the importance of sharing, the importance of being generous, the importance of being given, because we all belong and we're all in need. Now, this has been something of a commercial, this sermon. Commercials, we went through the big give the last 2 weeks, and we heard commercial after commercial after commercial. We've been listening to NPR this week with commercial after commercial on giving. Commercials all follow the same outline. This is the way it was. This is the way it is. This product changed my life. I used to be lonely. I didn't have any friends. But now I do. What changed my life? Budweiser. It brought us together. I used to have a boring life. I didn't go anywhere. But now my life is thrilling and exciting. What made the difference? That Cadillac. It takes me places. I used to have a bad self-image, but now I have a good self-image. What made the difference? Jenny Craig. Or, as somebody told me after Morning Blend, male hair transplants. Paul's really giving a commercial here. This is the way life was. From the human point of view, we saw things dualistically. There was a line between us. But in Christ, for whom we no longer live for ourselves, but for Him, there's a difference. Now the line is gone, and people belong to each other because they belong to God. And that makes all the difference. As JC said at the end of the video, I was homeless, I was lost, and now I'm found, and now I have hope. That's what a reconciling church does. It says, this is the way it was, but this is the way it is now. We are ambassadors of reconciliation according to Paul. May it be so every day. Amen.